A warm welcome from my side. My name is Georgios Papaefthymiou. I'm working as a principal in ELIA Grid International, and I'm really glad to chair this session on the role of grids on decarbonization, so electricity networks. I would like to move quickly on the discussion that we will have, and practically, I would start from the idea of what decarbonization is for the power sector, and mainly it is linked to what we call variable renewable sources, so wind and solar. And what is happening at the moment and what we all talk about is a huge deployment of such resources. And going quickly, I would say that the key problems, what I've been working on it 20 years, the key problems are, one major problem is actually that you have energy, a huge amount of energy at some points in time, where you have an overproduction of energy. And this is where you need to manage this overproduction. And on managing this, this is where you need to start expanding your power systems, your grids, and you need to manage to find ways to change the way that the energy is actually consumed. So the strategies that we talk about is a radical change. We try to move towards more electrification, so use more demand to use this energy that will be overproduced, and of course to build more grids. I'm really glad that the panel I have, because my panel is I think is quite diverse in a way, and we will tackle several of these problems. So I will start with Mr. Adam Sieminski, and you're senior advisor in the board of KAPSARC, and it has been the discussion since the morning about how Greece is going to become the Saudi Arabia of Europe in the future of renewables. And I would say that our future on renewables, we're talking at the moment about really coupling systems. We're talking about actually, again, importing energy, about renewable energy, and it comes again back to the same point that actually we will be importing quite a lot from North Africa and Saudi Arabia, maybe Middle East. So can you tell us what is actually the 3 Ds, so decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization, what it means for an oil-producing country, and whether Saudi Arabia is feeling threatened by the fact that we are moving so fast towards renewables? So.
Thank you, Georgios. The topic of this panel is electricity networks, and I don't know why you invited an oil and gas guy to comment on that, but let me see if I can try. What you're getting at for Europe is that the electricity network investments need to be expanded, and particularly into renewable energy sources and deployment, that we should have good interconnections, better grids, and a green energy supply in the region. And then you mentioned the 3 Ds, and I want to go over that again, and I want to comment on each of the 3 Ds. The 3 Ds of the green economy in this interpretation: decarbonization, decentralization, and digitization. So now let me see if I can't put this into the perspective of an oil-producing country. Decarbonization. Actually, I like to think of recarbonization rather than decarbonization. And now I'm going to take just a slight 1-minute detour, and I'm going to complain about what I've heard yesterday and today over and over again. We're going to have zero carbon. And in fact, I even looked up, the United Nations has the UN race to zero. I don't know. I don't want to win that race. I think that the words have to be very precise, and we have to mean what we say and say what we mean. It's not zero, it's net zero. And it's very important to think about net zero. Carbon is not the enemy. 80% of the world's energy comes from carbon. right? So what we need to do is focus on what's the problem. Do you think the problem is sulfur dioxide? Last night at the Acropolis Museum, I saw the damage that was done by sulfur dioxide and acid rain to the Parthenon and the statues there, right? So now we're dealing with that problem. Now we have a new problem, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is an emission. It's the problem. It's not the fuel. The fuel is providing huge benefits to people all over the world. In fact, there are people that don't have a freezer to turn off. They want a refrigerator. They don't even have clean cooking fuels. 1.5 billion people can't cook with a clean fuel. It could be propane. Is that such a sin? Why don't we find some way to deal with the emissions that come from propane rather than saying we're going to come up with some solution that won't work for everybody? All right, I'm going to come back to. So carbon's not the enemy. The enemy is the emissions. Deal with the problem, not some fanciful idea of what the problem is. So decarbonization. In Saudi Arabia and in a number of other countries, we're dealing with what we call the 4R pillars of the green economy. Reduce, reuse, recycle, and then a 4th R, remove. Reduce includes renewables and efficiency and nuclear. You know, I just read today that Belgium is going to shut down a nuclear plant today, last night or today. And I'm thinking, so is there a crisis in Europe or not? What kind of insanity is it when you're going into a winter and you don't have enough electricity that somebody says, let's shut down the nuclear power plants? If you have a crisis, use every tool in the toolbox. If you want to build a house, you have to have more than just a hammer. Use everything at your disposal, and that's where I'm going to come to decentralization. Your D, decentralization. This, in the energy context, this is actually a pretty interesting one. Let every nation figure out what they can do and do it to the best of their ability now. Don't try to create some single solution that won't work in the countries that can't do some things. Now in Saudi Arabia, there's actually going to be, we heard earlier, there's a huge renewables program. There's a target for 50% of electricity in Saudi Arabia, the capacity to be renewables based by 2030. It's a stretch target. It's not going to be easy, but there's big efforts underway to do that. There are hydrogen projects using solar and wind electricity to generate the hydrogen, and hydrogen being generated from natural gas and natural gas liquids. So some people say blue hydrogen, green hydrogen. You know, I'm in favor of any of these things that can actually provide a solution. So let regional circumstances and national circumstances allow different solutions to be advanced. If it's a crisis, let's deal with the crisis and let's use every opportunity that we can to get there. Final thing, digitization. So in the context of the reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove, digitization is going to be very necessary, particularly for the remove options. The remove options include things like direct air capture of carbon dioxide and storage of carbon dioxide in geologic reservoirs, but also nature-based solutions, forestry onshore, coastal restorations like mangroves along the coasts, and even seagrasses as a way to store carbon dioxide. Let's try all of these things. One of the things that I did hear over the last few days, wholly supportive of, is the idea of driving the technology forward and the costs down. We need demonstration projects. We need to invest. So one of the other things I heard is high prices of gas means we should use less gas and more renewables. More renewables is great. The high price means we need investment. We need to invest. And if it's gas supply, that's better than lignite. So again, be practical, get real. Final comment, Georgios. Professor Georgiou mentioned the curse of oil. I actually think oil is a gift, not a curse. Okay, now the problem, you say, well, there are problems. It's a curse of bad governance. Bad governance is a curse. But oil itself is fantastic. In fact, Saudi Arabia is participating along with Canada, Norway, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the USA in something called the Net Zero Producers Forum. They're big oil and gas producers. They're producing more than half of the oil and gas around the world. And what they're saying is, let's go after the things that'll make a difference. First thing we do, deal with methane emissions, flaring and direct emissions of methane. That is something you can tackle immediately and actually have a tremendous influence on greenhouse gas problems and the climate challenges that are driven by that. They want to advance the idea of the circular carbon economy. That's what we call these 4 R's, circular carbon economy. Take the circular economy, reduce, reuse, and recycle, add, remove, and do absolutely everything that you can to drive it, and advance the technology. And I'll end on this. Advance the technology across the board in everything you can, find out what works, drive the cost of direct air capture down, and if you think it's not possible, just look what you did with solar and wind in the last decade or two. You cut the cost by an order of magnitude. If you can do the same thing for direct air capture, you will fix the problem and still be able to use the carbon-based fuels that have provided welfare, health, and incomes for people all over the world, and will continue to do so, in my view, for the next 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very interesting to have someone from the oil industry who is in such a panel, because but you have to understand also that, I mean, the Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia talks about changing the way of using fuels. I mean, the fuels have become more, the fossil fuels become very important in a way for chemical industry, and that's why the first priority is put renewables in the system as much as you can, right?
I promise to be brief. Like some people say, it sounds like greenwashing, what you're telling me. It's not greenwashing. Or let's think of, from my perspective, greenwashing is the idea that we're going to fly airplanes on electricity or something else. Airplanes are going to fly well on biofuels, and airplanes could fly well on synthetic fuels manufactured from hydrogen and carbon dioxide in that recycle and reuse philosophy. It's not greenwashing to say, let's get all of the technology working on practical solutions to the problem that the world faces. Saudi Arabia does not want to be part of the problem. Saudi Arabia wants to be part of the solution, and Saudi Arabia is going to try to lead in the solution because they see it as existential. Yes, they'll have the hydrogen, they'll have renewables, but they'll also have the continuing use of hydrocarbons. I'll say the bad word, fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are going to be around for a while. We have to deal with the greenhouse gas emissions that come from those fossil fuels and do so in a way that makes sense.
Thank you. Okay, I mean, I understand. And I think I would come back then, what I call the second problem of renewables. And the second problem is actually the fact that you have to face what we call the periods actually where renewables are not there. And then I would like really to talk what is happening in all ways, and that how we can manage, I would say, the system in such a way, and how what kind of challenges we face. And I would like to give the floor to you, Vasilis. So to tell me what has been actually the key challenges that we faced in the last years, and what is your experience on expanding grids and managing this transition and how we can actually integrate the digitalization solutions and make it happen.
Thank you very much, George. Thank you for the invitation, first of all. My name is Vasilis Georgiou. I'm coming from the consulting sector. My world is the electrical networks and the power systems. I'll try to address your question. I'll speak about our territory and our area here and how we witness and how we see electrical network changing. I would say that Greece has a very ambitious program, in energy transition, and it seems that for the time being, it is one of the leading companies in RES integration, at least among its neighboring countries. Today, the RES integration in Greece has reached already 9.3 gigawatt, while the target for 2030 is 25 gigawatt. The plan for 2030 is that 70% of this installed power will come from the renewable energy. If we want to continue on the figures, today the hosting capacity of the Greek network, and when I say network, I'm talking about the transmission and the distribution network together. It's 17 gigawatt. We have to reach the 25 gigawatt until 2030, and this difference discloses the investment and the effort that we should make as a country in order to enhance our system and reach our transmission and distribution capacity. As the RES integration to the system increases, of course, we are coming closer to the decarbonization. We have also the increase of the dispersed generation, and this brings decentralization to the center of our interest. When we talk about decentralization in the electrical networks, we have to consider transmission and distribution. Starting from the distribution, we have to see that the distribution network today is becoming transforming from a passive network that it was in the past to a very dynamic network. You have the combination of power generation, power supply, and power control. Decentralization and in this level means that we have the need as a network for advanced system, advanced control system. We have the need from very advanced control schemes and systems and management systems. I would only mention systems that have been developed in Greece and in other countries as well, that they are taking the same journey. And these are SCADA systems, energy data management systems, metering systems, outage management systems, and everything which is related to the control of the network. If we go to the transmission level, to the high voltage level in Greece, I think that the system operator in Greece is performing very well. They have demonstrated a very ambitious also plan for development of the system. I can only mention a few examples here, and that includes the reinforcement of the existing network in terms of equipment upgrade, installation of new substations, installation of new transmission lines in the system, the reinforcements of the interconnection with the neighboring countries in the north, a very big program to connect the islands, the isolated network of the islands to the mainland and to the interconnected system. And of course, I think it is very important, it has a very big geopolitical effect, to mention that Greece as a territory participates in quite a few transcontinental projects, and I would mention the Eurasia Interconnector and the connection with Africa, with Egypt, for transferring power from Africa to Greece. So to answer your question, I think that those who are responsible for the networks, and these are the operators, are doing very well. They have a very good pace, I believe, as a country, and as an area, we will reach the Green Deal targets quite soon. And I believe that not only we will put a lot of hope on the renewable energy for the decarbonization, I believe that practically Greece is becoming, with all this network investment and energy hub, to transfer electricity through the country to the European countries and other partners as well.
Thank you. I think this is part of the plan. Greece is, from its unique position, I mean, will be a bridge by definition. And I would like now to come to you, Professor Mason, and we come back now to what I call always the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is actually what I called also before. We're analyzing systems, renewable systems. We want to go 100% renewables. And what happens in all our scenarios is that we see there is a period where there are no renewables. And what we imply, and we realize also now, is that there is this other fuel that will cover us. And it used to be in our plants, it was always gas. And now we end up in a kind of like a paradox where on the one hand, we want gas to be there, but our plans is to kill gas somehow, right? To go out of it. So how do you see this? Do you see a paradox? Do you see a problem there? I mean, how could this work? Will gas be there as much as we want to do this transition?
Well, first, let me thank the conference organizers for including me here. Yes, I see a paradox. So let me just sort of sketch the background problem. At a superficial level, it's transparently obvious that renewables like solar and wind suffer what we call the intermittency problem. The sun doesn't shine at night. In many places, Wyoming, which is where I'm from, is not one of them. The wind doesn't blow all the time. Apparently off the coast of Iceland, the wind blows all the time as well. One of my former doctoral students is setting up a plant to harvest wind there and send it 1,000 miles under the northern Atlantic to the UK. But with those exceptions noted, you know that there are periods in a 24-hour cycle where you don't get renewable energy. What's less well known, I think, and what was a surprise to me to learn, is the same sorts of oscillations occur over the course of the calendar year. It's obvious for solar. In the middle of summer, you have much longer periods of sun. It's less obvious for wind. So we have these fundamental issues of great swings in the delivery of these sources of energy. And it's worth noting that the swings in solar and wind are not orthogonal. You don't get to have one of them go down at the same time the other goes up. So you're going to have periods of time where you have a lot of renewable energy, and you have other periods of time where you don't have a lot of renewable energy. These are not matching up with demand. So it follows that there will be periods of time where the markets are very tightly constrained, where supplies are bordering on insufficient to meet demand, and other periods of time where they're copious. In a perfect world, you would harvest in the bountiful seasons, and you would store your chestnuts so that you could use them in the lean times. That technology isn't really there yet. Right? So what do we have in its place? We have something perhaps like natural gas, which can be easily brought online or taken off, and which can, to an increasing degree, be delivered across the globe. So you can harvest natural gas in West Texas and send it by pipeline to the Gulf Coast area and run it through a liquefaction facility and put it on a boat and send it to Europe. Lost in that dialogue is the amount of money that is required upfront to build the facility that will do the deed, that will liquefy that natural gas. It's a massively large investment. Hundreds of millions of dollars, quite probably into the billions of dollars. Put yourself in the place of that entrepreneur. Why would you make that $1 billion bet? You need to have some assurance that you'll be able to pay that off across time, that you'll make transactions, they'll be quite lucrative, you buy low and sell high for a long period of time. And implicit in that notion is that you will have access to that market for a long period of time. So absolutely, we see here a paradox. We want you to spend that $1 billion to build your liquefaction facility. We want you to invest in a carbon capture. We want you to invest in hydrogen technologies. We want you to invest in next generation nuclear small modular reactors. Each of these is expensive. Each of these entails very large upfront costs. Each of these requires an ability to pay them off across time. Each of these is at risk of being gutted by what game theorists, I'm in my other role, I'm an applied game theorist, call the holdup problem. That is to say, once you've spent that massive amount of money and built that facility, you've lost your bargaining power. So somehow deals have to be struck early on, perhaps before the investments are made, to assure that person who's going to make that very large investment that they won't wind up getting strangled after the fact.
Thank you. I mean, indeed, this is going to be one key challenge, but we see now already that we're facing it. We're facing the challenge already with like scarcity in Europe. And I'd like to thank you. Maybe we are a bit on the limit with time, so I would maybe welcome a very short statement from everybody, and then we can close the session. So maybe I can start from you.
I think that there is a very big challenge for Greece and for other countries to enter the renewable world. Renewables can solve many problems. One is, of course, is the environmental problem, but recently we have realized that there are also other problems associated with it. And I'm referring to the geopolitical one and the political ones. On the other hand side, as an engineer and as a somebody who works on the systems and the network, I would say that increasing the integration of renewables in the systems and in the networks have a lot of challenges. The networks and the systems are facing challenges to cope with the additional renewable generation. It's a very critical issue. It's an issue to be studied by the operators, by the developers, by the IPPs. And I would be happy to share in another occasion all this experience with you, George.
Thank you, yes.
So I'm very optimistic for the integration of new renewable sources. And I believe that, yeah, the future is here. Without having to say something bad for the oil, I don't want to...
There's a lot to do in front of us.
Yeah.
And so what to do with the oil, say?
By the way, it is very interesting that one of the major oil producers in the world, Saudi, is also a pioneer in the renewable energy sector. And I'm saying that from my own also experience because I work a lot with the specific country. So, yeah, challenges are here. It's up to us.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay.
What would you say then? Is there a final statement?
It's actually a follow-up to your comment. Saudi Arabia welcomes the idea of the 3 Ds in electricity: decarbonization, decentralization, and digitization. This makes a lot of sense. It makes sense for many countries, and it does for Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, I think, will try very hard, as you said, to add renewables to its own grid. And maybe make some of that through the interconnection that exists from Kuwait to UAE and Qatar and Oman, make that available regionally and maybe even expand it. But let me just finish again with this idea. This is good. There are huge efficiency programs in Saudi Arabia. There are fuel efficiency programs for automobiles. There are electricity lighting efficiency programs. There are efficiencies for industrial motors and air conditioners. Air conditioning is a big thing in the Middle East, and having good, efficient air conditioners is something that Saudi Arabia has actually been leading the way on. So this is, again, I absolutely agree with all these things that need to be done with electricity and moving in this direction. But to be practical, we can't exclude the other solutions that involve natural gas and oil. And we have to find some way in that context to deal with the emission problems. And I think it's going to be doable. Thank you.
I have to tell you, sorry, George, I have to tell you something that you're going to like. You know, in our world, in the electricity world, in the power systems world, the more you increase the integration of renewables to the system, the more conventional reserves you need to keep the safety of the system. Okay, so this is, I think, something that will make you be, you know, relaxed on this issue.
I think this was Chuck's message.
Exactly, this is a message. Maybe a last point also from you. It comes back to you, and there was a discussion.
Thanks. That was going to be my message, but that's okay. I'm going to expand on that a little bit. So I think it's instructive to contemplate the nature of the market for, let's say, for electricity. Demand is likely to be very inelastic for multiple reasons, not least of which is that people don't get clean, unadulterated, real-time signals. Prices just aren't structured that way. But on top of that, imagine that you're in a situation, you're in Texas, there's a deep freeze. If you don't run the heater, you're going to, your house is going to get very cold, and indeed you may freeze to death. How much would you pay for electricity in that circumstance? Your demand is super inelastic. The source of supply in the world that we're imagining here is made up from, let's say, from 50%, 30% renewables. What do we know about electricity supply for renewables? It's very low cost until you hit capacity. Each of these sources has a capacity. When you hit capacity, supply becomes virtually perfectly inelastic. Our textbook model has prices formed by the intersection of supply and demand. What the textbooks never say, but what I think we have to think about long and hard as energy economists. What happens if supply and demand are both super inelastic? Do we know that there will be an equilibrium price? Do we know that that equilibrium price will be within the means of typical citizens? Do we have any idea how we're going to deal with a situation? If the answer to the first two questions are no, it's not within people's means, no, there is no reasonable equilibrium price. Something has to kind of fill in the gaps. And that, I think, is why, to the extent that you have increasing portfolio of renewables, you have to have an increasing portfolio of backstop. Because in those moments where you haven't got the sources of energy that you need in order to make those markets come to equilibrium, we cannot have $1 million a kilowatt hour prices without having political revolt. Something has to cover that. Something has to fill that in. And I think right now, until something else comes along that can allow us to arbitrage, that's natural gas.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this comment. And I think with this, we would like to close. Thank you very much. And we'd like to see how the brave new world will be with the next session. Thank you.